What's going on YouTube? I'm back again with another video. Today I wanted to do a quick review of Forspoken. Now, in general, this game didn't really get that great of a reception from the games media, so I wanted to tell you how I felt about it, and I'm also going to be trying something new. I created something I'm calling a value score, so by the end of the review, you will get my overall score for the game, and I will also give it a value score, which will be the price that I feel comfortable recommending this game at. I wanted to try something a little different, maybe try and do something some of the other reviewers weren't doing, so just let me know how you think it turns out in the comments. Anyways, let's get to it. Let's talk about Forspoken. Now, in Forspoken, you play as Frey, an orphan from New York City who gets transported to a magical world and gets magical powers. To break it down simply, Forspoken is like Alice in Wonderland meets a Marvel movie. You can feel heavy inspiration from both. I feel like it actually explains why a lot of people got a cheesy vibe from the dialogue that they heard in the trailers. Now, I was one of those people that initially thought it sounded a little over the top, but when I played through it and got everything in context, it really wasn't that bad. I would say it's no worse than a Marvel movie, and I really do feel like that's actually what they're going for here. They're going for a Marvel-style take on Alice in Wonderland. What really tipped me off to this was when about 5 minutes into the game, Frey gets thrown into a serious situation and has a gun shoved into her face. When that happens, the music starts to play is Marvel-style superhero music. It sounds pretty darn close to something you would hear in a Spider-Man movie.
Keep joking. We will leave your body in this fucking alley, and I promise you, no one is going to miss you. No. Okay?
It gives the entire game a superhero vibe, and those kinds of context clues are littered throughout this game, all the way through to the credits. So I do think they were going for that superhero Marvel cheese, and I think they succeeded. I'm not the biggest fan of that style of writing. It's getting a little old in my opinion, but I think they definitely landed on target. Now, while I still have the trailers on my mind, let's talk about the graphics and the visuals. I'm just gonna come right out and say that I feel like this game got a noticeable downgrade from what we saw in the trailers. When I initially saw the trailers, I was pretty impressed, but now I have a feeling that those were running on an optimized PC because what I ended up getting throughout my playthrough on my PS5 was wildly inconsistent. There were times where it looked nice and crisp and felt like a PS5 game, but there were other times where I felt like I was looking at an early PS4 game. I wouldn't say it's horrible, but I feel like with this game being a PS5 and PC exclusive, that it should have been able to do a little bit better. I don't feel like I really saw anything that made me go, wow, they couldn't have done that on a PS4. There were times where I thought it looked great, and I ended up getting some great pictures. I do feel like the particle effects for the different spells were really awesome, but there just seemed to be a certain lack of polish to the visual quality. I wouldn't say it's atrocious or unplayable, it's just noticeable. That, along with some other small visual issues, like for example having no HDR adjustments, I felt like Forspoken left me feeling a tad bit underwhelmed in the visual department. Now, one thing that wasn't underwhelming was the gameplay. I actually found the gameplay in Forspoken to be pretty great. The combat and the traversal were both high points for me, and they're a big reason why I kept coming back for more. Frey is super agile, and she can dash and parkour her way around the map with ease. In a way, it actually reminded me of playing Infamous First Light. Running and dashing around with Frey felt a lot like zipping around as Fetch with her neon powers. Very similar vibe, very similar feel, fast, wild, and a little bit out of control. When you mix that with the combat, it becomes a potent mix of movement and magic that feels really, really good. There is a slight learning curve, but once you learn how to seamlessly switch between your different spell sets, you'll be zipping around, unleashing a magical torrent of destruction in no time. It's a ton of fun, and was definitely the major draw for me in this game. That's not to say it's perfect though. There are times where it feels kind of clunky to go through all of your spells. You have multiple item wheels chocked full of different kinds of magic, and once you progress far enough into the game, you're dealing with 4 different skill trees. It can all become a little overwhelming, but my solution was to experiment and find some of my favorites. Then I was able to go into my skill tree and respec my character to eliminate some of the less used options. In that way, I was able to keep my magic wheels less cluttered. They also made it so that each set of spells has a move that will switch you out on the fly. So while you're fighting, you can do different moves that will switch your spell type automatically. For example, you can hit them with your fire magic, do a move, and at the end of that move, it will automatically switch you to your earth magic. This allows you to flow from element to element without pulling up the radial menus. With that being said, it's still a little on the clunky side, and I think it could use a little streamlining. The only other complaint I really had with the gameplay was the adaptive triggers. All of your magic spells are cast using the triggers, and I found that after a while, my fingers started to get tired. But I was able to turn it off in the options, so it wasn't a deal breaker or anything, it was just a minor annoyance. Now let's talk about the story for a quick second. I thought the story was actually another highlight of this game. I ended up enjoying the narrative a lot more than I thought I would. I think, as an Alice in Wonderland style of tale, they did a good job of keeping it fresh, and they even surprised me in a few different spots. Overall, I would say it was a pretty decent story, and it did a pretty good job of keeping me invested. I felt like the writing had a few spots where it was over the top cheesy, but that's kind of the Marvel superhero trope, and taking it as it is, I thought they did pretty good. I do think they could have done a little bit better getting you hooked in at the beginning. It does take a little while for the game to develop and get its hooks in, but it does eventually get there. Now, what I want to do next is go through some of my notes here and talk about some of the other issues that I have highlighted. One of the issues that I had was with invisible respawning barriers. For some of the missions, if you stray too far off of the path, you'll get a warning with a countdown that will end up respawning you if you don't turn around. I really don't like these. I would much rather have the developer trap me in with the level design than do that. It pulls you right out of the experience, and I feel like it just ruins the flow of the scene. And while we're talking about getting pulled out of the experience, another thing that I didn't like were the time trial areas that they had throughout the world. It just felt weird to go from exploring to being in a timed trial where you have to kill all the enemies as fast as you can. It feels like a mini game, and I would have liked to see them maybe implement that through an arena or something to that effect. It just felt jarring to be headed somewhere and run into one of those. There was one instance where I crossed a bridge, and then on the other side, I ended up having to cross the bridge again and kill the enemies as fast as I could. It felt like an interruption to what was going on in the open world, and it just felt disjointed. And on the subject of the open world, let's talk about that for a second. I've seen some outlets say it's bland. I don't think it's bland. I think it's just overly empty. There's some interesting places and pretty scenery, but there's just a lot of empty space in between. I tried to keep in mind the fact that Frey moves pretty fast through the environment, so she definitely does need some space to play with. I just felt like they overdid it a little bit. It was a little too big for far too little payoff in my opinion. There's hundreds of treasure chests dotted all over the map, but they don't really have anything interesting in them. It's usually just an old coin or some crafting materials. You can use the coin to craft upgrades for yourself, but I went through the entire game without really needing to craft much of anything. So, after only a few hours, I stopped searching for treasure and I just started hitting the major landmarks. And that's kind of when I started to get Ubisoft syndrome. I felt that all too familiar open world fatigue. Now, this is something I've been personally struggling with lately. I'm starting to get really tired of the open world formula that we see in a lot of games today. So it's definitely going to factor heavily into how I feel about my final decision for Forspoken. So to wrap things up, at the end of the day, I had a good time with Forspoken. I think there's a lot of fun to be had here. The combat, traversal, and the story were the high points for me. I don't think this is a terrible game by any means. I think it just suffers from falling into an overused open world trope that is just really starting to show its age. I think if they would have trimmed some of the fat and made a stronger intro sequence, this might have gotten a better reception with the press. It got better as the game went along, and I think they could have hooked more people sooner. So with that, for the final word, I'm giving Forspoken a 3 out of 5, with a value score of 50. Now, I would say this is a high 3. I almost made a case for a 4 out of 5 here, but it just had too many issues for me to put it over the top. I do think if you're a person who doesn't mind the Ubisoft style open world, if you love Assassin's Creed and Far Cry and all that, then I think you'll probably love this game. For me personally, it's a 3 out of 5, but with a value score of 50, if you find this on sale for $50 or less, I would consider it a buy. So that's going to be it from me. Those were my quick thoughts on Forspoken. If you stuck around this far into the video, I want to say thank you. Let me know what you think about Forspoken. I want to hear your experience with the game. And let me know what you think of the value score. Do you like it? Is it something I should continue doing? I don't know. Let me know. Anyways, thanks for hanging out with me today. I'm Gamers Gamut. Until next time, take it easy.